My name is Abby Joseph Cohen, and I'm the president of the Global Markets Institute at Goldman Sachs, where I also serve as senior investment strategist, commenting on the capital markets around the world.
I'm Ann Kaplan. I'm the chair of Circle Financial Group. We're a unique organization which has created a platform for women to organize their financial lives and be better investors. We're dedicated to empowering women in the financial arena.
I'm Nancy Peretzman. I'm a partner of Allen & Company, LLC.
I'm Rosemary McFadden. I'm Deputy Mayor for the City of Jersey City. I was the first woman elected president of any stock or futures exchange in the United States when I became president of the New York Mercantile Exchange in 1984.
I'm Sally Krawcheck. I started my career on Wall Street a little bit by accident. I came here in the late 1980s, 1987, having been a journalism major at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Not knowing exactly what to do with my life since it was the 80s, I figured Wall Street was probably a good place to start. I was at Solomon for a few years, New York and London. I then went back to business school in an attempt to go into real business, to get off of Wall Street and go into corporate America. But the bug had really bitten, and so on graduating from business school, I came right back to Wall Street. I was an investment banker for a number of years, but it didn't quite take. And taking a little bit of a break from Wall Street, I came back as a research analyst for Sanford Bernstein. I did that. I had the pleasure of covering Wall Street itself, so the stocks that I covered were the Wall Street firms. And I did that for about 3 years before they asked me to go into management. And figuring I had nothing to lose, I went into management. I was director of research at Bernstein. I became CEO of Bernstein, then went over to Citi in 2002 to run Smith Barney. Was CFO of Citigroup for a couple of years before becoming CEO of the Wealth Management Group at Citi.
There were many instances that I faced with regard to discrimination. This was particularly true in the early days when many people were unaccustomed to having women in the profession. It was very common, for example, for me to be invited to be a speaker at an event and yet be greeted at the door as if I was my own assistant, or in one case I was refused entrance to the building because I was told women did not belong. How did I deal with him? I told him I was the speaker. He said he didn't care, and I just walked right by him. More important than those one-off situations, however, was the manner in which women were treated during the course of their daily work and by their coworkers. The expectation often was that they would not be given the same level of opportunity, hence not the same level of respect, and it was not a particularly welcoming environment.
Then when I went to social work school, it was a fantastic experience because I learned about psychology, body language, group dynamics, which I hadn't previously known. My MSW ranks right up there with my MBA. Perhaps it's even slightly more important in the work that I did. And I think that what you learn in social work school, which has to do with psychology, group dynamics, body language, is more important for business than simply learning accounting. Because so much of business has to do with negotiations, group interactions, and being able to understand how the client is reacting to things that are proposed. So it gave me the ability, when I found that a client looked as though they were uncomfortable with the discussion in the meeting, to say, you look as though you're uncomfortable with this. Let's talk about it before we move on. And that was a unique skill that stood me well and that I got in social work school, not business school.
You were differentiated against all the time. I mean, in some ways, I think I was differentiated against in that I got the job I was hired. I was the only female hired that year at Blythe Eastman Dillon. I think they were desperate to hire women, and so they hired me because I had a fairly unconventional background. You know, I wasn't a Harvard MBA who had spent 3 years in a bank training program. I think God bless Harold Tanner. He saw some potential and said, well, you're not a typical, you don't have a typical background to be hired, but I've got to make sure I hire one woman in every class, so you seem to be the only one that wants this job, you're it. Solomon, you know, we used to joke in the early 80s that if you got pregnant, they fired you. And it was only a half, you know, serious joke that the women on the trading floor, in fact, there was this wonderful story where there was a woman who was in my class in college that in the late 80s, early 90s, it would have been early 90s, I guess, I was made co-head of the diversity committee at Solomon. Typical, you know, all right, you're a female, you can co-head the diversity committee. And I get a call from a woman on the trading floor who had been in my class at college, and she said, well, Nance, I just read in this memo that you're now co-head of the diversity committee. Let me tell you one story. She said, I joined here, whatever, 12, 13 years ago in the training class at Solomon. There were 40 or 50 trainees. There are 12 of us left. 10 are managing directors, and then there's me and the black guy.
With the sheer numbers of women entering into the workforce, not only in the United States, but literally around the world, organizations have had to change. They had to put in more bathrooms to accommodate female employees. Some organizations have gone out of their way to promote flexible schedules. A vast majority of organizations have had to offer classes in sexual harassment and cultural diversity classes. It's made for a much more healthy and more productive society. It's given women the opportunity to earn a career, to be independent, to raise a family on their own if the circumstances so arose. And I think it's also been liberating towards men. It's taken some of the burden off of them in terms of being the sole breadwinners in within a family. And I think it's caused men to become better people, working with women on a day-to-day basis and in a different capacity than dealing with them within the family context. So it's been very, very positive.
I think financial services has come a long way over the past 20 years in terms of recognizing not that diversity is important for diversity's sake, although for goodness sake, every single one of these firms has got, you know, all sorts of diversity programs and all sorts of lecture series and mentoring programs and all the very politically correct things. Everyone's got all that stuff. I think more importantly, there's been a recognition over time that it's not a diversity of gender or color that is what's needed, but really a diversity of thought. And that the diversity of experiences that come from being a female as opposed to a male, coming from a different country, is really what's needed in order for these companies to be competitive right now and into the future.